Hello and good evening to everyone. Today's session is week 5 and day 20. So today we would start with element 8 on general workplace issues. So far, we have covered topics from element 5, element 6, and element 7. So we have covered three elements and we have covered around 10 number of topics. Okay. And we have also covered the requirements of section 1 through section 4 of the IG2 guidance document. So which explains the requirements on how to complete the risk assessment. Okay. So section 1 is about the background of your organization, which includes the scope. And then section 2, the risk assessment, where we identify 10 hazard categories. And for each of the hazard categories, we would give a hazard description, who might be harmed and how, existing controls, additional controls, and the responsible person for the further actions and the timeline by which it must be implemented. And third is section 3, prioritize what hazard, and we must justify on how, why to manage that particular hazard. And step section 4 is to communicate, review, and what is the step 4? Communicate, review, and follow up. Okay. All right. So now we move to element number 8, general workplace issues. 8.1, health, welfare, and work environment. So in this element, we have 7 hazard categories or 7 different topics. 8.1, health, welfare, and work environment. 8.2, working at height. 8.3, safe working in confined spaces. 8.4, drone working. 8.5, slips and trips. 8.6, safe movement of people and vehicles in the workplace. And 8.7, work-related driving. Once mic is on. Okay. So we will be discussing for each of these hazard categories what are the health and safety risks and the control measures. So in section 1, it is very clear what we must write. So we must clearly specify what is the hazard description, and then who might be harmed and how. So in the how part, when we are writing about the consequences, we must be very specific in writing about the injuries or other damages and ill health. And then with control measures, a range of control measures to be properly briefed. And the other two columns is about the role and the responsible person. So it is important how clearly we give description for the hazard for the given hazard category. So with 8.1, welfare facilities, okay. So those that are necessary for the well-being of workers, okay, or the facilities provided for workers' comfort, such as washing, toilets, rest, changing facilities, and somewhere clean to eat and drink during breaks. Okay. So all these comes under welfare facilities, and the employer responsibility is to provide welfare facilities that are adequate. Okay. Now when we say adequate, your risk assessment will be specifying what is adequate. Okay. Now for example, uh, employer must provide adequate number of or adequate toilet facilities. Okay. So it clearly depends on the number of occupants. Okay. So for example, if there are 10 occupants in your work area, then you may consider one toilet as adequate. But if there are, let's say, 30 number of occupants and you provide one toilet, then it may not be adequate. So clearly, the number of toilets or the water closet that you provide depends on one of the factor is the number of the workers or the occupants. So likewise, each of these welfare facilities must be adequate and for which a proper assessment of risk must be undertaken. What welfare facilities does your employer provide and consider vulnerable people? Okay. So drinking water. So by law, employer must provide drinking water. Okay. Now, this drinking water must be wholesome. That means it should be good for life. Okay. So, water should not be contaminated. So, they must provide a purified, uncontaminated water. And these drinking water must be adequate. And then the washing and sanitary facilities. Okay, so washing facilities or the toilet facilities, they must be adequate. And not just adequate, these washing and sanitary facilities must be clean and hygienic. So the regulation will clearly specify under the washing and sanitary facilities what are the requirements an employer must provide. And then they must provide adequate eating facilities. So where the employees can sit and eat. Okay. Again, what is the proportion of the eating facilities that they must provide? For example, for every four, there must be one seating arrangement. And then adequate ventilation. So the purpose of ventilation is to provide clean air and to remove the odor or other contaminants from the work area. Okay. So the airflow, the number of times the air changes in your work area must be adequate. For example, in kitchen or in basement or in office space. So depending on the nature of the work that we do, the ventilation must be adequate. And then smoking area. So smoking is prohibited, but where smoking is, a smoking area must be provided. And then changing facilities. So sometimes because of the nature of the work, the workers may have to, change their clothing. Okay. So in that circumstances, they must provide a changing room, preferably separate for men and women, and the changing room must be clean, well lit, and ventilated. And then facilities for new and expectant mothers. So for new mothers or expectant mothers or those who are breastfeeding, they must provide facilities where they may take rest, and also a provision where they can ensure that all the requirements are being put in place. And then workplace seating and workstations. So as we have discussed in element number 6, the DSC requirements, display screen requirements. So ergonomic workplace seating and workstations must be provided. Adequate lighting and heating. Now, again, you see the word adequate. So these are eating and lighting. The the lighting that you provide, again, it varies from workplace to workplace. Okay. So where in the warehouse, forklift trucks are being operated, or in the office setup where people work with computers. Okay, or in the car park area where there would be vehicular movements. Okay, or maybe in a workshop, so where they work with machineries. So in different areas, different lighting requirements would be needed so that these lighting is adequate. So in general, any lighting, they should not be very low or poor lighting, or high contrast or low contrast, or lighting should not cause any reflections or glare or creation of shadows. So lighting must be adequate so that someone can do their work safely and without harm to themselves and others. Okay. And then the rest areas. preferably separate for men or and women, and rest areas must be clean, well lit, ventilated adequately, lighting to be provided, and provision of the soap, or provision to dry your hands. So these are the requirements. Now, apart from that, shower areas to be provided. So shower areas where you do some like manual handling or physical activity work, where you profusely sweat, or working with exposure to chemicals. So in those circumstances, a shower area to be provided, where they could clean up from the contaminants. Okay. So they all uh, comes under the requirement of welfare facilities. Okay. So when you're writing your risk assessment, you can consider one or two of these welfare facilities, and you can write it as a hazard description. So for example, you may say the rest areas are insufficient number of rest areas. Okay. Or you may say lighting in the warehouse area is poor or inadequate, which may increase the risk of vehicular collisions. Okay. Or you may say drinking water, where the drinking water is contaminated, or or they are not adequate, or the changing facilities are not provided, or the number of changing facilities is inadequate, depending on the number of workers who would be required to access it. So identify any of the unsafe conditions, or inadequacy in each of these welfare facilities, and you can write about who might be harmed, or how, and the control measures. Okay. So now if we go to number 1 to 7 and 1 to 8. Okay. 1 to 7 is INDG 293 and 244. So 244 and 293. We'll check that. Yeah. Welfare facilities are those that are necessary for the well-being of your employees, such as washing, toilet, rest and changing facilities, and somewhere clean to eat and drink during breaks. Okay. I'm just going through, so you are aware what information or what content you can find. So later you can use them when you're preparing the risk assessment. Uh, so toilet and washing facilities. Okay. You have to provide adequate toilet and washing facilities. So what is meant by adequate? So when they say adequate toilet and washing facilities, it means you have to provide enough toilets and wash basins for those expected to use them. Okay. So you don't want people to stand in a long queue to use the toilets or wash basins. For example, if the number of toilets or wash basins is 1 is to, let's say, 30. Okay, so those things really would make people to wait in a very long queue. Okay, and then where possible, separate facilities for men and women. Okay, the facilities to be clean, and then a supply of toilet paper, and for female employees, a means for disposing of sanitary dressings, facilities well lit and ventilated, hot and cold running water. So you don't have to include all this, but you should understand what it means by adequate. Okay. So likewise, if you go through the other part, drinking water. Do I need to provide drinking water? Yes, the law requires that you provide drinking water and ensure that the drinking water is free from contamination and easily accessible by all employees. Okay. And there are adequate supplies into consideration the temperature of the working environment and types of work activity. So if it is a hot environment or hot summer, then ensure that you have enough supplies of drinking water compared to during a winter or during other cold temperature times. And then cups or a drinking fountain are provided. Okay, so go through this document, on INDG 293, and the name of the document is Welfare at Work. Now, there's another document which talks about ventilation, temperatures, lighting, and the cleanliness and workstation and seating. Okay. Anyway, we will come back to this in a moment. So, workplace temperature. Okay. So, again, uh, people may work in areas where the temperatures could be extremely hot or extremely cold. Okay. For instance, yeah. Examples of hot temperature environment, working in foundries, glassworks, laundries, or working outdoor, okay, constructions during a hot summer. Okay. Similarly, a cold environment, working in cold stores, food preparation areas, and in the open air, okay, during winter. So when people work in extremes of temperature, what happens to our body and what are the consequences to our health? Okay. Now, the law will not tell you what is the minimum temperature or what is the maximum temperature you should maintain indoor because the thermal comfort of an individual will vary from person to person. Okay. For example, for me, my thermal comfort could be like 22 degrees Celsius. Okay. Or maybe for another, a person. For example, for Vinod Kumar, the thermal comfort could be 18 degrees Celsius. Or maybe for another person, it could be like 25 degrees Celsius. Okay. So these thermal comfort varies. So therefore, the regulation does not specify what is the minimum or the maximum temperature, but it gives you some guidelines. Okay. Now, why this thermal comfort varies? Okay. So, for example, one could be if there are any sources of heat in the workplace, okay, where I'm working in areas where there are machineries. So the heat, the radiant from the machineries, so can make the environment hot. Okay, or if someone is doing a work which does not require much of a physical activity, like people sitting and working with computers. Okay, so they would prefer a warmer temperature because there is not much of a physical activity in them. Okay. Or if I'm wearing, a thick jacket, okay, then I would prefer a cooler temperature. Okay, compared to another person who is wearing, a thin, loose clothing, they may prefer a warmer temperature. Okay. Or so these are some of the factors that could influence someone's thermal comfort. Okay. So for workplace where the activity is mainly sedentary. So sedentary is not much of a physical activity. Okay. So for example, in offices, The temperature should normally be at least 16 degrees Celsius. So they don't say minimum or maximum temperature you should maintain indoor, but rather they say at least 16 degrees Celsius for sedentary work. If work involves physical effort like manual handling or working with machineries, or so they require at least 13 degrees Celsius. So now again it depends on your risk assessment to maintain what the right temperature for people to carry out the work. Okay. Okay. Now, what are the health consequences when our body is exposed to hot or cold environment? Okay. So, heat, where processes generate excessive heat. Okay. Increase distance between worker and source equipment. Like I said, if I'm working very close to a machinery where the machinery would emit radiant heat, so in those circumstances, increase the distance between the worker and the source equipment. Use thermal lagging on hot pipe work. So thermal lagging is where insulating the hot pipe work again to minimize the heat from that hot pipe work. Water cooling of hot surfaces and use of reflective shielding. So uh, which will not absorbs the radiant heat or other heat in your work area. Okay. Now, what is our body temperature? Okay. So our core body temperature is, okay, so core body temperature is 37 Celsius. Okay. So 37 Celsius, or in Fahrenheit it is, I think, 98.6 in Fahrenheit. Okay. So this is a temperature our body to maintain for its core functions. Okay. Now, if I'm working in a hot environment, what happens to my body is my body will absorb the heat from the surrounding environment. Okay. So when my body absorbs the heat, okay, my body temperature will start to increase. Okay. So my body temperature will start to increase because my body is absorbing the heat from the surrounding environment. So what happens in that process is dehydration. Okay. So dehydration can happen. So dehydration is where the loss of water and salt content from your body. So from sweating. Okay. So dehydration, and then your muscles will cramp because of loss of salt content through sweating. And then heat stress. Okay. So heat stress is where your body temperature starts to increase. And if it increases very rapidly, it can cause heat, stroke, and death. Okay. So these are the health consequences from exposure to extremes of hot environment. Similarly, when our body is exposed to a cold environment, the body temperature drops to reduce. Okay, so when it drops to reduce, our body will start to shiver. Okay, and then it may result in reduced temperature. Okay, and if it is raining, then it would increase the risk of slip, trip, and fall. Okay, and then during these cold times, the visibility will also be reduced, the lighting would be poor, so all this would increase the risk of accident. And then frostbite can happen. So frostbite is where if you come in contact with very cold temperature. Okay. So similarly here the heartburns. Okay. So what is frostbite? Frostbite is an injury caused by freezing temperatures that damages skin and underlying tissues. Okay, so due to the freezing temperature, what happens is the blood supply will be disrupted because our body is exposed to the freezing temperature. So when the blood supply is interrupted, the tissues will be damaged because of loss of flow of blood. So that is what the tissue damages. So most commonly affecting extremities like your fingers, toes, ears, and the nose. These are the end of our body circulatory system. Our body circulatory system, the end points, the nose, the ears, the fingers, and the toes. So all these areas, it becomes very hard, and the blood flow will be interrupted, and the tissue damages can happen. Okay, so these are all the health consequences that you would be including in your column number two, how they might be harmed. If one of your hazard description is about a hot environment or a cold environment. Okay, so for example, if I write a hazard description, just give me a moment, let me open that sample sheet. Okay. Okay, so I don't have, so maybe you can write. Okay. So hazard description, construction workers working, outdoors, carrying out. Okay, so construction workers working outdoor, preparing mortar in hot environment. So this would be your hazard description. So who might be harmed is the construction workers who are preparing the mortar, and how they might be harmed. So from exposure to or continuous or prolonged exposure to hot temperature or hot environment could result in dehydration from loss of water content, muscle cramp from loss of salt, and then heat stress and heat stroke by increase in body temperature. Now, if you look into these, the sweating process, it is actually a defense mechanism. Okay, so when your body is absorbing heat, it is able to maintain the temperature by sweating. So when we sweat, the heat absorbed is released. So thereby the core temperature is balanced. But what happens if we do not sweat? So that is when the body temperature will start to increase because our body is not finding ways to release the heat that we have absorbed. Now, this can happen when the humidity is high. Okay, so during a high humid level, our body will not sweat, and this is where the temperature starts to increase. Similarly, in a cold environment, the shivering process. Okay, so when we are shivering, there would be an internal, muscular activity which generates heat inside our body. So that heat generated inside our body will try to balance the coldness that or your body is absorbing from the cold environment. Okay, but again, the continuous or prolonged exposure to cold environment, the defense will not be effective, and the body will start to shiver more, and your temperature starts to decrease, and then it could lead to other consequences. So in terms of how they might be harmed, it is important that we specify. Okay, now in OSHA, or here also you could see there's a OSHA fact sheet. So heat disorders, heat stroke, heat exhaustion, heat cramps, heat rashes, heat fatigue. Okay. And looking at the control measures, general ventilation will dilute hot air with cooler air treatment or air cooling, and then heat conduction blocking. So simply, blocking the radiant heat through these any hot pipe work or any machineries, they must be insulated. And apart from that, in terms of administrative work controls, acclimatize workers. So the workers we must expose the worker slowly through these increase in temperature. Okay. So for example, for new workers who will be similarly, see for example here, so, where heat levels are high enough to produce heat stress, you may acclimatize with a regimen of 50% exposure on day 1, 60% on day 2, and 80% on day 3, and 100% on day 4. Okay. So, for example, on day 1, you expose them to like 2 hours in a working day. And then you slowly increase the exposure, like day 2 or day 3, the exposure from 2 to 3 hours, and then 4 hours. So, but instead of that, if immediately you are exposing them to these high temperatures, for a very longer period of working hours, then that would increase the risk. Okay, so that is what the meaning of acclimatize. So, likewise, when you're exposing them to a cold temperature, again, you must gradually expose them so their body would adapt to the changes in the temperature, and it would reduce the risk of consequences. Okay, and then for a heat environment, replace fluids. Okay, so keep them hydrated and encourage them to drink small amounts frequently. Reduce the physical demands. So already the weather is hot. Doing a much of a physical activity will only further increase your body temperature and increases the risk of fatigue. So reduce the physical demands in the work. Provide recovery areas where they could temporarily take break in a cooler temperature areas. Reschedule hot jobs and monitor workers who are at risk of heat stress. So these are the control measures you would include in column 3 and column 4 if you're writing about a hazard description, which is hot temperature. Okay. So likewise, for cold temperatures, they can reduce judgment and concentration, which means it increases the likelihood of a human error or a human mistake. Work cycles should be implemented to allow workers to rest and enter warm shelters. Okay, so here it's a cold temperature environment, like working in a cold storage area, or working in cold, outdoors during winter. So take breaks and they must take break in a very warm, sheltered areas. Plan extra time for tasks and allow for food and drink breaks. Okay, so if that work could be done for 4 hours, then you plan that work to be completed for 5 hours. So people would take more break and more rest and time to to eat and to drink. So plan extra time. Okay, so provide extra time, and then dry replacement clothing and changing facilities for heavy sweating. Cold weather clothing provided. So provide them with jackets and thick trousers. That would be very much ideal for a cold temperature environment, and providing with a comfortable headgear and ear neck protection. So where covering the extremities of the circulatory system, covering your ears, covering your nose, and covering your fingers and toes. Okay, so these will ensure your body temperature does not reduce, and also ensure there is a continuous blood flow. Okay. So training is important whether you're working in hot or cold environment, because as a worker they should clearly understand, okay, what are the signs and symptoms their body shows from working in a hot or a cold environment. Recognizing symptoms that may lead to heat stress or hypothermia. So hypothermia is a condition where your body temperature increase. Now the opposite is hyperthermia, the body temperature reduces. And then able to perform rescue and first aid measures, recognize the increased risk of incidents. Like these are symptoms starting from headache or dizziness, fainting. All this could be considered as significant symptoms. So be aware of importance of physical fitness. So when we talk about physical fitness, a good sleep is also a very important requirement. Okay, and then importance of having a balanced food and diet, importance of hydration and maintaining the salt level, because you're also losing salt content from your body through sweating. And then effects of drugs and alcohol. So don't no alcohol or no caffeine or no sugary content, because all this would make you tired, especially when working in this hot environment. Okay, so these are all covered as part of training and providing an increased awareness. So this would significantly reduce the risk by people when they know about how to protect themselves from this exposure to adverse weather conditions. So next is working at height. Work at height, it is subject to where there is a risk of fall. Okay, so if there is a risk of fall, and where the fall could lead to a potential harm, then we define it as working at height. So what affects risk from working at height? Okay, so there are many workplaces or work sectors where work at height is very much a routine part of their work. For example, construction workers, they would be working on roof, doing installation or maintenance, or during installation process, or they would use access equipment to gain access to a structure. Okay, so there are significant working at height involved, particularly in the construction sectors. So what affects the risk from working at height? Okay. If you're using an access equipment which is poor or unstable, yes, we work at height in offshores. Okay. Correct. So any access equipment that you're using, provided it is faulty or unstable, will increase the risk of work at height. Okay. Now, access equipments. So whether you're using a mobile elevated work, access equipment platform, or something like this, a mobile scaffold. Okay, so this generally used for light duty work, like indoors or outdoors, like very much for maintenance purpose or for installation purposes, or whether you're using these scissor lift or telescopic mast or boom lift, okay, or ladders. So these are all examples of access equipment. Okay. So when using this access equipment, if the equipment is unstable, like think about you're placing positioning this equipment on an uneven floor condition, or where there is a high wind causing the equipment to become unstable, so you fall from height. Okay, so that is one of the risk factor, falling from height, where your access equipment is unstable or it is in poorly maintained condition. Okay, and then the second risk factor is the vertical distance. Increased height means increased injury risk. So the more the height, the higher the fall distance. Okay. So as the fall distance, so for example, a person falling from 3 meters or 6 meters or 10 meters. So higher the fall distance, higher the risk of injury. But again, even falling off from a 2 meter height could cause fatality. Okay, so vertical distance is another risk factor that affects working at height, and then unprotected edges. Okay, so these platform, as you see at the top platform, you have edge protections. Okay, so you have these guard rails and handrails to prevent you from falling. If these edge protections are missing or not installed, it increases the risk of falling. So think about someone working at the end of the roof without any fall protection or fall preventions. Okay. So unprotected edges, fragile roof, working on roof structures which are fragile, which could be easily breakable, like glass or plastic windows. And then deterioration of materials. Any material will deteriorate over a period of time. For example, the roofing, uh, like exposed to adverse weather conditions, exposed to rain, exposed to hot sun, and then insects, or where it is constructed due to poor quality materials. All this would make the materials to deteriorate and break. So when someone is working at height, the building will collapse and people will fall. And then if there is any falling material, okay, so any material stored on the platform, and if the material is not protected, then they may fall onto people below. And finally, the weather conditions also increases the risk of injury. Hot weather, your body would be become physically fatigued, and right, like for example, headache or fainting. So people may faint and fall from height due to extremes of hot weather conditions. Or cold weather, it increases the chance of slipping from rain or snow or slippery surface. Okay, so these are the extremes of weather conditions that should be avoided when working at height. Hierarchy of selecting equipment for working safely at height. Avoid work at height where possible. Okay. So if the work can be done by avoiding work at height, then that should be the most effective way of working. So work at height should be avoided where possible, and extendable equipment should be used. Okay. If I'm using a ladder, to access and to clean the external walls of the windows, but instead of using a ladder, if I can use an extendable pole, and if I could clean those walls of the windows from the ground level, then that should be considered where possible. So this will completely avoid working at height by not using the ladders. If avoidance is not possible, which is likely in most circumstances, then I would consider using a temporary platforms. So temporary platform like any of this that we have seen in this picture. So a platform with edge protections to prevent fall, or a restraint system to prevent workers reaching areas with a fall risk. So restraint systems, what are they?
Safety harness.
Harness is fall arrest system. So this is fall restraint. Like your the belt. Okay. So you see here, this restraint system or the belt will ensure that you do not access to the edge of the roof, because the belt will only provide you access before the edge of the roof. So this is restraint system. Okay. So you could see in this image, you could clearly see the length of the lanyard of the belt will not make you to gain access to the edges of the platform. So this is restraint system. And fall arrest is, it will arrest your fall. So which is the harness. So it will not prevent fall, but it would arrest your fall. Again, minimizing the consequences. Okay. So restraint systems to prevent workers reaching areas with a fall risk. Okay. And working from solid surfaces or roofs with permanent fixed guardrails. And then where preventing fall from height is not possible, the next step is minimize. Equipment that minimizes the distance and consequences of a fall. So where a fall prevention is not possible, the next step is how you minimize the distance of the fall or the consequences of the fall. Okay, so using a fall arrest systems, and then using a work restraint and work positioning systems. Now work positioning systems, like where they want to gain access the a long pole, or even for the trees climbing. So you could see here, this is the work positioning system. Okay. And then rope access system, very similar to that. So again, you could see very much used to clean the glass windows of the building. Okay, and also to gain access to any such structure where it may not be feasible through any of the other access systems. And then safety nets, so it provides you a soft landing. Okay, and similarly the airbags. Okay, they do not prevent fall, but they minimize the consequences of the fall by arresting the fall and by providing a soft landing. So with the safety net, there should be a good ground clearance, so that when someone falls on the net will expand. So that expansion should not, hit the ground level. And similarly, airbags. These airbags very much ideal where it is a low fall distance, but for safety nets, it could be used for a high fall distance. So all these restraint systems or fall arrest systems or safety nets, they should be subject to thorough inspections and testing so that they are in good conditions and they are active when needed. So preventing falling objects or materials. Okay. So when an object falls from height, the consequence is the object fall onto people below. Okay. So it could cause head injuries and could even result in fatality. So how do you prevent materials falling? When we say falling objects or materials, okay, it could be the tools the workers use for working at height, like simple hand tools. They may drop the tools, okay, if the tool is not properly secured in the tool bag, or any materials that they are working on it, they may drop those materials, or any rubbishes uh, or unwanted materials that are stored on the edges of the platform so they can fall. So these are examples of falling materials. A good housekeeping is an important requirement. And then nothing should be thrown or tipped from height. So horseplay, people may throw these tools from one platform to another platform. And then brick guards. Okay, so by installing a brick guard, it will prevent falling materials. Now these are brick guard, they also serve as a secondary protection where it prevents fall of people. So these are the brick guards. Okay, so prevents falling materials. And if you look at the image, you could also understand it also provides a secondary protection of falling people. And then netting or sheeting the scaffolding. So netting the scaffolding to prevent any, the materials used for constructions to cause, fall as a falling object. Exclude people from work area. So do not allow any access to people where there is a risk of falling materials. Okay. So if you cannot provide a brick guard, or if you cannot provide a netting, then exclude people from that height area. Making items secure, whether you're using some hand tools, store it in a proper tool bag, or harness it to your body or a rope so they don't fall over. Okay. Any items stored on the platform must not be accumulated. Proper housekeeping should be done. Do not store on the edges of the platform. Or if people have to walk below, underneath the falling risk of falling objects, then walkways to be covered. These are some of the controls that you could focus if the risk is falling objects. And then emergency rescue. So one of the emergency situations working at height is when people fall from a safety harness. Okay, they would be suspended, or their body would be immobilized. So it is important to rescue the people who have activated the safety harness. Okay, so suspension trauma. So think about someone who has activated the safety harness. Okay. Okay. So it is important to rescue the person. So this is one of the emergency situations that could, occur when working at height. Okay. What is suspension trauma, which is the medical condition, or it is also called as harness hang. Yeah, harness hang syndrome or orthostatic intolerance. So suspension trauma. It is a life-threatening condition that occurs when a person is suspended vertically and motionless in a harness. Okay. So when where the body is motionless or immobilized, what happens is the leg straps restricts the blood flow. Okay. So causing blood to pool in the legs. So all the blood will flow down the body and it gets pooled in the legs. So there will not be any blood that would be pumped upward, and your brain will be deprived of oxygen and the person would die. Okay, so the brain, this deprives the brain and heart of oxygen because the heart is not pumping and all the blood flows to your leg, so potentially causing unconsciousness and death within minutes. So it is an emergency situation where people, uh, they should be rescued within 5 to 7 minutes so that they can prevent this suspension trauma or the harness hang syndrome. Okay. Now, after rescuing the person, do not make them to immediately lie down, because when they lie down, all the blood that is pooled in your legs will start to flow back to your brain. And this is not good because these blood that is pooled in your leg, these are bad blood or deoxygenated blood. Okay. So the more and more deoxygenated blood, when it flows back to your brain, it can again cause a collapse and unconsciousness. So your heart would start to pump, and more oxygenated blood will start circulating throughout your body. Okay? So here the symptoms: nausea, vomiting, lightheadedness or dizziness, sweating, visual disturbances, anxiety, or sudden fainting. So prevention is move your legs. Okay, so move your legs so that there is a blood flow. Okay, flex your muscles or push against foothold to activate your leg muscles and maintain blood circulation. Okay, and then the first aid measures. So all this will be part of emergency rescue procedure. Consider emergency and rescue arrangements and consider life-threatening suspension trauma without prompt rescue. Workers must be provided with suitable and adequate information, instructions, and training. Different types of emergency and rescue scenario considered. Okay, so where a worker might be trapped in the access platform working at height. Okay, or where they might be in a suspended position after falling in a safety harness. Okay, or where the platform collapses and the worker might again be trapped between the platform and the ground. So these are all the different types of emergency and rescue scenario that should be considered and appropriate procedures to be developed. And these procedures must be incorporated into the worker type specific risk assessment. Okay. So provision of training and instructions. Training forms part of the route to competence. Competent people are also required for using different types of platforms, which we would be covering in the next few slides. Different qualifications are available for variations of working at height equipment. For example, these are rope access, which we saw. Okay, there is a separate certification body for doing this rope access work. Okay, so different accreditation body, and those people, apart from work at height training, they should also be certified for rope access, and then only they would be competent to use these rope access systems. So different qualifications are available for variations of work at height, and also competency for installation of scaffold or erection of scaffold or dismantling of scaffold. Okay, and then instructions must be provided on how to use the equipment safely, and instructions on hazards. So what are the potential hazards of working at height or using such access equipments, and what circumstances could cause fall of people or fall of materials, and what is required for them to ensure that it does not cause harm. So all these are considered as part of training, which provides awareness and increases the safety related behavior when doing such risk work activity like working at height. Okay. All right. So we will take a break. After the break, we will look into different types of access equipments. What are the risk and control measures? Okay. So we'll take a 15-minute break and then we shall resume. Welcome back after the break. Ladders and step ladders. So, types of ladders: leaning ladders, fixed ladders, step ladders, combination ladders, and roof ladders. So, all ladders must be adequate strength and height. Okay. So, depending on the requirement of the job, they should be of adequate height. Okay, and suitable for the job, cleaned and grease free, so they do not cause any slippery surface, constructed of appropriate material. For example, if you're working at height on electrical works, then you must not use aluminum type ladder, and they must be structurally sound, prevented from moving at top and bottom, position at 75-degree angle. So this prevents the ladder from toppling over. Okay. And then placed on a firm, uncluttered, non-sticky surface and suitable for the job. Okay. So we will go to one of the reference document on ladder, safe use of ladders and step ladders. Okay, so if you click this link, yes. Figure 1, ladder showing the correct 1 in 4 angle. Okay, so what does it mean when we say 1 in 4 angle? You see here, right? So for every 1 unit out, okay, at the bottom, for every 4 units up. Okay, so if the distance of the ladder from the wall, if the distance is 2 meter, then the ladder, the height where it should be positioned would be 8 meter. So this 1:4 rule must be followed, or maintaining 75-degree angle. Okay, so this will ensure the ladder is at correct angle and does not cause slipping away from the wall. Okay, so 1 in 4 angle or 75-degree angle. And here figure 2 correct because user maintaining 3 point of contact. Okay, so at any time there should be 3 point of contact, which means either two hand one leg should be in contact with the ladder, or two legs one hand should be contact with ladder. So in figure 2, both the legs and the left hand, so 3 point of contact is made. But in figure 4, it is incorrect because due to overreaching, the user unable to maintain 3 point contact. The reason is only the right leg and left hand is in contact with the ladder. So because of overreaching, unable to maintain 3 point, which is unsafe. So if you're using a ladder and where 3 point contact could not be made, then ladder use should be prohibited. Okay. So when a ladder can be used, okay, so there are certain requirements which should be met for a ladder to be used. Now, again, here you see check all sections are locked before using the ladder, and take care when closing a telescopic ladders so your fingers do not get trapped. Okay. Now, yeah, sorry. So here are uh, the safety rules. Only carry light materials and tools. Okay. Do not overreach. Okay. Make sure the ladder is long enough or high enough for the task. Do not overload the ladder. Check the pictogram or label on the ladder for any advisory information. Always grip the ladder and face the ladder rungs while climbing or descending. Okay. Do not slide down the stiles. Rungs are the horizontal part of the ladder, the steps. Okay. The stiles are the vertical part, which is, those are called stiles. Do not try to move or extend the ladder while standing on the rungs. And do not work on the top three rungs. Okay. So never work on the top three steps of the ladder. They should only be, for a safe hand hold. Okay. So if you require to use the top, two or three steps of the ladder, then the ladder is not suitable for that particular task. Okay. And do not stand ladders on movable objects. Avoid holding items when climbing, so that you cannot maintain a 3 point contact. When you're climbing, uh, two hands, one leg, or two legs, one hand should be on contact. So if you're holding any tools or any items, then you would be unable to maintain a 3 point contact when climbing. Okay. So these are some of the precautions to be taken when using ladder at work. Next is scaffolding. Okay. So I'll just show the picture of a scaffolding for those who are unaware. So here is an example of a scaffold, which is a mobile scaffold here. Okay. And you also have the independent tied scaffold to the building. Okay. So what is a scaffold and what are its use? Okay. Now, we can look at the definition of a scaffold from the ILO, okay, from one of the convention, which is C167. Okay. So we go to this convention, I'll copy and you paste it here on your browser. Okay. C167 is Safety and Health in Construction Convention. Okay. Now, under the part one of this convention, we could find the scope and definitions. So, what is the definitions here for scaffold? Okay. The term scaffold means any temporary structure, fixed, suspended, or mobile, and its supporting components, which is used for supporting workers and materials or to gain access to any such structure, which is not a lifting appliance. So a scaffold is not a lifting appliance like a mobile crane or a forklift truck. So this is not a lifting equipment. Okay. So rather, it is a means of temporary structure, fixed, suspended, or mobile, which is used for supporting workers and materials or to gain access to any such structure. So it is not a lifting appliance. A lifting appliance means any stationary or mobile appliance used for raising or lowering persons or load, such as the forklift truck or other load handling and lifting equipment. Okay. So with this a scaffold, what can go wrong? Okay. So the control here measures is they should only be erected and inspected by competent persons to recognize standards. So there are certified people, only those certified people should erect the scaffold. And after erection or installation of the scaffold, they must be inspected. So to tag that it is safe to use. Take account of the weight to be placed on it. Like the load handling equipment, scaffolding will specify the safe working load. So they must never be overloaded and take account of the forces that may impact its stability. So high wind, they can, impact the stability of the scaffold. So after any adverse event like high wind or any vehicle colliding with the scaffold, they must be re-inspected and re-tagged. Components of scaffold must be sufficient and used correctly. Okay. Now look at some of the basic components of a scaffold. Okay. So you have a standard. Standard means those upright tubes. So these upright vertical tubes are called standards. Okay. And then you have ledgers. Okay, so ledgers are horizontal tubes. So these horizontal tubes are called ledgers, and there is another short horizontal tube which are called transoms. Okay, so these are called transoms. And then you have the a toe board. So toe board placed at the bottom of the platform. So the purpose of this toe board is to prevent falling materials. Okay, any material stored on the platform edges, or if a worker drops a tool, they do not fall off the platform. And then you have the scaffold board. So these are some of the basic components of a scaffold. Okay. So these components must be sufficient and used correctly. So using a good quality components, or if using a substandard components, then then the scaffold may collapse and people fall from height. And they must have sufficient bracing. So bracing is the zigzag point here. Okay. So these are called bracings. They provide a stability, a robustness for the scaffold. They must be footed on ground, firm ground using square base plates and sole boards. Okay, maybe in this picture it's not showing up. So yeah, you could see here where the standards. Okay, standards are resting on the base plate. Okay, and then you have underneath the base plate is the sole board. So the purpose of the base plate is to prevent standard from sinking onto the ground, and the sole board provides even distribution of weight throughout the scaffold. And you see at the top you have these guardrails. Okay, so guardrails and couplers and braces, and so these are the components. So footed on a firm ground level. They should not be installed in an unstable ground level or in a loose soil condition. Must be secured to building. So scaffold must be tied to the building to provide more stability for the scaffold. Sufficiently sized working platform with suitable guardrail. Now, there are different types of scaffold, like light duty scaffold, medium duty scaffold, heavy duty scaffold. So, depending on the weight that it holds. Okay. So, where it's a heavy duty scaffold, then it can support more weight. That means more workers and more building materials. Toe board in place on the outside edge to prevent material falling, and the scaffold protected against vehicle collisions. So these are the controls we would write in column 3 and 4 if we write about scaffold in a hazard description. So independent tied scaffold. These are a freestanding of structure to which it provides access. So they are tied to the building, and structure bears none of the scaffold weight but is secured to the structure for stability. Next is mobile tower scaffold. So mobile, it means the scaffold, the tower can be moved. So they have wheels. Okay. So these are a movable tower scaffold, very much used for light duty work. Okay, like for building, for maintenance job, for installation, or for cleaning purpose, they use this mobile scaffolding. Okay. So what are the safety precautions when using mobile tower scaffold? They have a similar features as independent tight scaffold. Like guardrails, you see they have these guardrails, and they have the toe boards. Okay, here it is not visible. And then you have this zigzag bracing and set up on a firm level ground. Okay, so it should be on a firm level ground. May need to use outriggers and or tied to the building. So outrigger is a type of extended support you see in this picture. Okay, so these are called outriggers. They extended, the foot support. So this provides a stability for the scaffold. Okay, by increasing the dimension of the base, we are increasing the scaffold stability. Where outriggers required, they must be provided. Okay. Wheels locked when in position to prevent unintended movement of the wheels when people and material are on the tower. Tower should not be moved when person equipment on it. Reduce to 4 meters or less in height before moving. Check for overhead obstructions. Access ladder integral to the tower. Okay, so provided with a hinged bar, gate, or hatch door for access. So you may have seen here the previous image. You could see the access ladder inside of the tower. Or if no proper access ladder, then you should climb from inside of the tower and not from outside of the tower. Avoid overloading. Safe working load must never be exceeded. And then sheeting, strong wind exposure, avoid loading with heavy materials, avoid use to hoist materials or support rubbish chutes. So they are separate or independent tower scaffold. They must not be used to lift or hoist materials or to support rubbish chutes. So if I type mobile scaffold, This is from Dubai municipality. And from HSC. Okay, so whatever the points that we have discussed, we could see a little more brief on those. For stability, how triggers and requirements of inspection of the scaffold before, after installation or after any event that may impacted the stability of the scaffold. Okay. So every 7 days, they must be subject to inspections. And if you're using, what are the precautions to be taken? Or when you're moving the tower, what are the precautions? Okay, all right. So next is a MUP, which is mobile elevated work platform. This scissor lift, boom lift. Okay, so these are either vehicle mounted or independent. Normally they use a boom, okay, articulated or telescopic or scissor mechanism to lift the work platform. So the precautions when using these MUP, okay, they must be suitable for the task. Okay. So they should not be used for where the access may not be able to be, gained. They must be set up on a firm ground. So even level ground, no loose soil, no overstretching while on mute. Okay. Identify and avoid overhead obstructions so you do not come or make contact with any overhead obstructions during movement or during lifting process. The equipment must be maintained and kept in good repair. So they must be subject to thorough inspections and examinations, and also a pre-use check before using the equipments. So inspections before use, checking your guardrails and toe boards in place, which is the significant form of fall protections. Use of fall arrest harness, collision protection. So creating a safe buffer zone around the MUP working area. Supervision when in use and avoid overloading. So the controls included in columns 3 and 4. So what are guardrails? Guardrails where they are a requirement when working at height. Okay. So height of the guardrail should be sufficient to prevent falls. Okay. Now, the different standards specify a different height for the guardrail. So approximately, around 95 to 100 centimeters. So we could say approximately 1 meter high. Okay. So there should be a 1 meter high that is high enough to prevent falls. Okay. So local codes and standards, they normally describe the dimensions of guardrail safety features. And then the maintenance operations should be carried out according to strict procedures. And excavation work alongside pedestrian traffic route should also be suitably protected. So where people may fall into the excavated pit, so they should also be provided with the guard rails. Okay. Now, looking at the search. Okay, so I'm just searching with OSHA. Okay, so you can see here. The top edge height of top rails or equivalent guardrail system members are 42 inches. Okay, so the height, okay, of the top rail 42 inches plus or minus 3 inches. Okay, so the from the platform the height 42 inches. Okay, and then you have the mid rails. Okay, so mid rails should be at least 21 inches high, and mid rails are installed at a height midway between the top edge and the walking working surface. So you could see the top rail, mid rail. Okay, so for example here, so this is the top rail and this is the mid rail, and at the bottom you have the toe board. Okay, the height of the top rail from the from the platform ground level 42 inches plus or minus 3 inches, and also the toe board 10 centimeter or 4 5 inches, so that should be tall enough for to preventing any objects falling from height. And there are also requirements that specify what should be the gap here. Okay. So this gap should not be large enough for a person who could fall through this gap. Okay. So please, for your risk assessment, you're not going to specify the technical, the measurements, but if you are working in such sectors, then please refer to your local standards. Okay. Okay, I did not include. Yeah. All right. So we will conclude with 8.1 and 8.2. So tomorrow we will run through the remaining 8.3 to 8.7. So these are very short learning outcomes. So we will complete this, and then we would complete one learning outcome of element 9. Okay. And then Wednesday, we'll complete the remaining learning outcome of 9, and then we will cover half of element 10. And by Thursday, we will be completing the 11 elements of GC2. Okay. So by Thursday, we will be completing the syllabus part. And on Friday, we'll do a quick review on the second paper. So for those who have registered for your upcoming examination, which is on, so when is it? Yeah, okay. So month of July. So 8th of July, Wednesday. Or the next examination date would be on 5th of August. So if you have registered for 8 July and today we are on 22nd, so you have less than 3 weeks of time. Okay. So even if we are completing the training this week, still you have 2 weeks of preparation. full swing. And so this is only for your GIC one. And remember, for GIC to risk assessment, you have 2 weeks from 8th of July, which would be 22nd July, the deadline for GIC2. So accordingly, you can focus and plan for the next 2 weeks for your GIC1. So that's why I wanted to complete the session with GIC1 by discussing a paper. So you could go with full swing and preparation for your GIC1, which is on 8th of July. For others, those who are registered or planning to register on August or September, you may have a good amount of time. But again, it is important how much of time we would be, utilizing for our preparation. Okay. All right. So anyways, you know what the examination when the dates are. So accordingly plan. Time management is very important. So getting familiar with the subject is one part, and then framing your answers, understanding the questions is another part. Okay. So that requires a significant time for preparing your answers, which is again based on the foundation or the preparation that we have done. Okay. All right, so today we will conclude with these two topics. So tomorrow we will cover 8.3 to 8.7, and we would be completing 9.1 and 9.2 for tomorrow's session. So thank you all and have a good one. I'll catch you tomorrow for day 21. Thank you. Yes, I just saw your message. I have a question. Okay, so I'll be taking the exam in the month of August while refreshing if I get some doubt. Yes, definitely you can reach me through WhatsApp. Yes. So in WhatsApp, voice call is restricted. So you can send a voice message or you can text me. Okay. And I can also call you on your direct line if you're in UAE or in India. Yes, you can reach me.